Yeah, I got you. On.
You're in the 06010 focus. Fantasy focus.
Welcome into Marathon Monday. That is right. We're running 26.2 miles. Not quite. Not quite. Field, Stephania, and Mike Clay in for Matthew Berry. Matthew, for those of you that may not know because you've been living under a rock, is going to be on television for 28 straight hours. That seems perilous to me. But Then again, I question a lot of things that Matthew does. Tonight, starting at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, Matthew and Adam Schefter, who to my knowledge does not sleep as it is, will be on TV for 28 straight hours. Welcome to Marathon Monday. And Mike, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, it's good to be here. I haven't been on since Detroit. We were literally in another state the last time I was on. So actually, that wasn't too long ago. Right?
That's right. It was only a couple of weeks ago.
But that felt still like the offseason. Now I feel like we're really ramping it up. Right? Like now it's go time.
Yeah, we updated depth charts. Mike's done like 6,000 projections.
I know. You know what? I have a request from somebody who values your projections.
Okay.
Can you print them out and blow them up for those of us who can't read like the itty bitty font that you put them in?
If I could fit them all on a page that would fit on a screen, I would gladly do that. But
I just want
I'm always
the Reader's Digest extra large.
Let's just say we're working on something.
Okay.
We're working
I like
on
that.
I like it. So we are working on Mike's updated projections. Those will be sweet. We mean updated, not as in like more information, as in like reformatted, which is good news. We've got a double trouble coming up today. We've got the Saints. We've got the Panthers. NFC South preview begins. Fantasy football marathon. Again, 6 p.m. goes until 10 p.m. tomorrow night. However, part of that marathon will be this very show, the Fantasy Focus Football Podcast. And we are not talking about your traditional Fantasy Focus Football Podcast. Daniel Dopp, has something gotten into the powers that be at ESPN because they are throwing us on linear television for an hour tomorrow.
Are
5
you
p.m.
serious?
Eastern Time on ESPN2.
Somebody should have told me if that's what they decided to do. Have you guys been preparing for the show?
Not a bit.
Oh.
We're right on par.
Yeah.
I do the daily wager, so I'm ready for regular.
Mike just
no one
dropped
likes
it
a
out
bragger.
Fantasy from the National Football League.
This is the instant replay.
Well, I guess since you have your own other TV show that you do, you're just gracing us with your presence.
Well, Daniel just told me while that sounder was playing that I'm now not on the show tomorrow. So.
Oh, yeah. By the way, Mike, you've been demoted. Anyways, thank you, Mike Clay, for joining us today, making some time for us during an otherwise busy daily wager schedule. In 1 week from tomorrow, we're doing one other cool thing. We're going to New York for a live show. It's going to be at the Hard Rock Cafe in Times Square. Again, the event of the summer in New York City. When we met this morning, early this morning, I was told there was somewhere in the neighborhood of about 15 tickets remaining. 15 tickets, that's it. They are going off, they're flying off the shelves. Daniel, remind me one more time. Ticketweb.com, is that correct?
Ticketweb.com, you can search ESPN or Fantasy Focus.
So one of those two keywords, plug it into ticketweb.com. You'll find out what you need to know. You'll get a ticket. You'll have a blast. The last time we went to New York City was last year. We had an awesome time. Every year it slays in New York City. Now, we must get to the most bizarre and hilarious and perhaps ridiculous story that I can imagine. Sometime around Friday afternoon, let me paint you a picture, actually. I was walking over, meeting Chapin in Vermont. She was rehearsing to be part of a wedding. I was going over to meet the wedding party.
You guys are like perennial wedding guests.
That's what we do. We like the wedding. We're America's wedding guests. No big deal.
And
I'm walking over to meet her because I'm going to meet her to go from the rehearsal to the rehearsal dinner. And I get a notification on my phone from Adam Schefter. Antonio Brown is threatening to retire over a helmet issue. Now, about 30 seconds later, I went out of service. We're in the sticks of Vermont. Sometimes, Verizon doesn't travel as far as you might want it to in Vermont, NBD. So I'm like sitting there left hanging in the balance for like 45 minutes until we get back into service. But that's the headline. Antonio Brown, the same guy who has frostbite, the same guy who has not yet practiced for the Raiders since training camp began. He is threatening retirement if the NFL does not allow him to utilize the helmet that he has been using throughout the entirety of his 9-year career. Antonio Brown, yes, may have actually gone and painted his old helmet to try to cover it up.
Twitter was amazing.
It was
after
a
the
field day
of the
for
helmets.
Twitter. It was a field day. So, Stephania, I know here is sort of the timeline of events. On Friday, we learned he will not play football again, Antonio Brown, if the league doesn't let him wear his helmet. On Saturday, John Gruden says, whatever his decision is, we'll stand by him. We are confident he's going to be a huge factor for the Raiders for years to come. On Sunday, Brown plans on holding the NFL liable if he suffers a head injury. Those are all of the headlines. Stephania, I'll start with you to get a little bit more context on this, and then we'll talk with Mike about sort of what it means for his draft value.
Yeah, there was one more element in the timeline, which is that he had a hearing with an independent arbiter. There were representatives from the league on the phone, and Brown and his reps, and basically to discuss this, and we're awaiting a decision. I don't expect the decision to land in his favor, and I'll give you the background as to why. All helmets that are used on an NFL field have to be NOCSI certified. This is something that's been on the books for multiple years. This is not new. NOCSI is an independent body. It's not part of the league. National Operating Committee on Standards for Athletic Equipment. They certify, in addition to NFL football helmets, all the NCAA helmets you see, lacrosse helmets, face guards, shin guards, you name it. They certify equipment based on standards that it has to meet to be eligible to put on the field, to use in the field of play. So if you have a helmet that is not NOCSI certified, you can't use it to begin with. And helmets older than 10 years, they are not recertified, and therefore it wouldn't fall into the category of helmets that the league would even test with this testing that they've begun in the last few years. So that's number one. That said, the NFL and the NFLPA have been collaborating on a project to test helmets, safety test them. And essentially what they've done, they have an independent lab in Canada that puts helmets through not only linear impact, but rotational, accelerational, and then see how they perform. And there is a grid based on how those helmets have performed, and kind of like the street light colors, green, yellow, red. The helmets that perform the worst are in the red area and are thus prohibited from being used. When this data was first released in 2018, veterans were given 1 year to move from a red helmet into one of the yellow or green. Tom Brady's done it. Aaron Rodgers has done it. Antonio Brown says he doesn't want to do it. As far as I am aware, he's the only player who's refusing to change the helmet. So this is not new. My question was, here the team is sort of being held hostage by this, but this is not a new rule or new decision. So in addition to the lab testing, they've looked at how the helmets have performed on the field, and the helmets that have performed in the helmets are all tagged, and basically they've associated that with concussion injury. The helmets perform the worst there, correlate with the ones performed worse in the lab. There's your evidence. You can decide how you feel about that, but the bottom line is that's how the helmet rules came about.
All right, so Mike, let's talk about this, because throughout the course of preseason, there are a variety of different threats. Guys are banged up. Guys are getting limited reps. Guys are buried on the depth chart, whatever the situation might be. Guys are threatening retirement because of the helmet. So invariably, you're going to draft players that have some level of risk with them. It sounds like, per reports around Oakland right now, that Antonio Brown is near a return to the field because of the foot issue. Less of a threat than we may have perceived it to be about a week ago. Does this helmet saga impact the way that you evaluate Antonio Brown for this season? Or are you just imagining that, something, when the games begin in less than a month now, 4 weeks from tonight, as a matter of fact, for the Raiders, that it's Antonio freaking Brown. At some point, the guy's going to show up, and at some point, remember, this is still one of the most talented wide receivers to ever play the game.
That's exactly right. And I think once first of all, I'm assuming he's still going to show up for week 1 as of right now.
The dude's not coughing up $30 million guaranteed.
Exactly. So I have not really moved the needle too much. Now, he has missed a lot of time. He's had the foot injuries. Obviously, there's a little drama here. So I did knock his target share down just a tiny bit, 1 percentage point. Okay, so I put him behind a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster, for example, but I have him at wide receiver 8. So I'm not overreacting just yet. I'll keep an eye on this. Obviously, this stuff is always changing. I'm tweaking projections every day, and we'll keep an eye on the news here. But as of now, I saw him at 99 catches and 8 touchdowns, right? He's still going to be a wide receiver 1 as far as I'm concerned.
Let me ask you this, though. Does it not change for either one of you the fact that, let's say he, at the last minute, decides, fine, I'll come and play. And it's week 1, and he and Derek Carr really have not practiced together because the foot kept him off at first, the helmet, what have you. Does that not affect anything?
I'm trying to think about recent examples, and one that comes to mind is Amari Cooper. Talent rises. Like at some point, we can talk about reps, we can talk about chemistry and things like that, but when Amari Cooper is clearly way better than any wide receiver the Cowboys had, he took him 1 week of practice, not even, to get really good with Dak Prescott. With Antonio Brown and Derek Carr, not really. Here's how I'm using it personally. I'm using it as a tiebreaker. If you're sitting there on the fence and you can't decide between Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster, go ahead. Pick up Juju. I'm not letting it define the way that I'm going to address and draft Antonio Brown this year.
Right. And some offenses, when you're looking through the roster and trying to, project out where the targets are going to go or carries, it's hard to do, right? You just have a lot of mouths to feed. You can't find enough. It's not that hard with the Raiders. I know they brought in a lot of players, but how nuts are we going to go on Darren Waller or Hunter Renfrow in the slot potentially? They could get these guys involved, Jalen Richard in the backfield, but there's plenty of room for Antonio Brown to push for a 30% target share pretty early.
So let's just explore the hypothetical, because it's not just useful if Antonio Brown does for some reason actually sit out games, but in case something happens to Antonio Brown during the season, we've seen him miss games. Small sample size, but we have seen him miss a couple of games over the past few years. Tyrell Williams has sort of generated some steam during this time, right? Tyrell Williams, 4 years, $44 million, not insignificant amount of money. I don't say he's buried in the Chargers depth chart, but when you're playing next to Keenan Allen, you're kind of the understudy. Tyrell Williams, if something happens to Antonio Brown, and perhaps even if Antonio Brown does play Mike, maybe some value there. Being drafted on average right now, wide receiver 53, talented, fast dude.
Yeah, I think he, as he's being drafted right now, is probably a little bit of a value, even assuming Antonio Brown is ready to go for the season. But I do worry a little bit about his ceiling. That you mentioned buried in with the Chargers, and he was their number 2, and he played every down. In fact, over the past 2 seasons, actually never in his career he's finished top 20 in targets, but the past 2 seasons he hasn't missed a game. He's finished wide receiver 45 and wide receiver 48 in fantasy points, and that's despite being one of the most efficient receivers in the league. So yes, his target share could go up. He could finally get that volume if Brown is out, but I just think he's been limited so far.
I like him a lot in the best ball league. He'll have some weeks where he'll go for 4 for 125 and a touchdown, but probably to your point, the volume has probably been capped for a reason, right? I don't know about limited route tree, but most effective down the field. And the reality is the further you throw the football, generally speaking, the less efficient of a pass it is. And Tyrell Williams, with Derek Carr as his quarterback, will be more featured, but still not enough to make him I'm not.
I would say wide receiver
1.
3. If Brown's out, I would say wide receiver 3. No, for sure. Maybe he could sneak into the top 20, but I wouldn't go much further.
Okay, fair enough on that. The Raiders, as we know, have been a huge part of the narrative this summer, in part because they are on Hard Knocks. The training camp with the Oakland Raiders will be the 14th edition, or it is the 14th edition, of the 18-time Sports Emmy winning series. This series will chronicle head coach John Gruden entering his 2nd season leading the team, assistant coaches and players throughout training camp and the preseason. A 30-person NFL films crew will be in Raiders training camp in Napa Valley. Nice place to be. Shooting more than 1,750 hours of footage over the course of the series. Camera and sound crews will have an unencumbered access to players and coaches' meeting rooms, training rooms, living quarters, and practice fields. Hard Knocks, for those who don't know, launched with the Ravens in 2001, followed by the Dallas Cowboys in 2002, and resumed in 2007 with the Kansas City Chiefs, subsequently spotlighting the Cowboys again in 2008, the Bengals in 2009, the Jets in 2010, Dolphins 2012, Bengals 2013, Falcons in 2014, the Texans in 2015, and the Rams in 2016. The widely acclaimed series on the Cleveland Browns in 2018 earned 2 Sports Emmy Awards for production excellence. Hard Knocks has won a Sports Emmy every year it has aired since 2008. Talk about consistency. 7 of the last 9 teams featured in Hard Knocks have equaled or improved their win-loss record in the regular season. The Cleveland Browns launched the transformation of their organization last summer on HBO and went from a winless season to coming within a half game, 7-8-1, of a 500 campaign. Everybody wants to be a Raider. Now they'll find out what it takes to become one, said Raiders owner Mark Davis. Love the live read. Yeah. Honestly, we could all just sit here and tell you Hard Knocks is the bomb. Everybody here loves Hard Knocks. If you're not watching, you're missing out. Join the football conversation.
Got a lot of good material.
They sure did. If you're listen, so here's the plan. You ready? Here's a little itinerary for you. Tonight, 6 p.m. Eastern time, you turn on the tube to ESPN or the ESPN app, wherever you get your content. You watch for 28 straight hours. 28 straight. Get a little coffee. You'll be able to make it through. 10 p.m. rolls around tomorrow night. You watch Hard Knocks. That's a 29-hour marathon that I'm all the way in on. All right, Antonio Brown will certainly be a story. We'll keep you updated on that because I'd imagine at some point we'll get a ruling on his helmet this week, and I imagine at some point soon he'll be back on the field. In the meantime, time now for some Double Trouble.
Double trouble. Double trouble. Double trouble. Double trouble.
As of this moment, they're on double secret probation.
Going down to the Bayou, New Orleans Saints, of course, came within a defensive pass interference call, perhaps, of making the Super Bowl last season. Vegas projects them for 10.5 wins. Wow, Vegas trying to steal Mike Clay's thunder. You can take it up with a strip if you so choose.
Well, he's on Daily Wager, Field.
Yeah,
so I will. I very much will.
Vegas has them at 10.5 wins. They've been over this number in consecutive seasons and 6 times since Drew Brees was signed away from the then San Diego Chargers.
I'm at 10.7, by the way, so they're way off on this one.
Okay, Mike in Vegas at odds once again.
I see what you did there.
Let's professional. Professional. Let's talk about Drew Brees. Let's start right there because, Mike, you and I have him at quarterback. I have him at 11. You have a quarterback 10. There's actually a few spots behind where he's being drafted, which is quarterback 7. Which makes you wonder, right? I mean, Drew Brees is remarkable. First ballot Hall of Famer, one of the, I would say, 10 best quarterbacks of all time. Perhaps the most accurate quarterback to ever play the game in terms of precision and pinpointness, if I can make a word up. Awesome year last year, especially through 12 games. However, maybe, is he being overdrafted a bit because of what we saw through the first 3 quarters of last season?
Absolutely, or maybe the first 95% of his career, right? I mean, absolutely. This is look, the Saints have a defense now. They didn't always have a defense. In fact, they had some historically bad defenses, and that showed up in Brees' pass attempts and certainly in his fantasy production. Look, 6 top 10 fantasy weeks last season total. He finished outside the top 7 in fantasy points for the season for the second year in a row. Actually, last season, outside the top 10 in pass attempts, completions, and yards for the first time in over a decade. So, listen, he still is an elite player. The Saints, it's funny we're starting with them because they're my Super Bowl pick this year. I think they're going to be tremendous on both sides of the ball, but his fantasy ceiling is not what it used to be. He's just not going to get that volume anymore.
I also think, he's more efficient now, but it's also due to the run game. You have running backs who can catch passes as well. So shorter passes, more volume, more efficient for him, but less yardage. So fewer fantasy points.
Yeah, Mike, you mentioned that outside of the top 10, is that what it was, in pass attempts for the first time? As Kyle notes, 2012, 2016, his pass attempts per game, 41.51 over the past 2 seasons, which correlates with, remember the defense got good after week 3 of the 2017 regular season? So over the past 2 years, Drew Brees' pass attempts per game, 33.06
That's a lot.
Pass attempts, down 8.5 attempts from where he was during the 5 seasons preceding it. We love Drew Brees. Again, if you end up with Drew Brees as your starting quarterback, we are not besmirching your team. We are simply highlighting some ways in which his upside may be tapped a little bit relative to guys who are going further behind him, Baker Mayfield, Carson Wentz included. One more thing on Drew Brees. As we know, the Saints, they play well at home almost always. Drew Brees seems to be even more otherworldly at home than on the road, which the numbers bear out. Last year, 25.2 points per game, 322 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns per game. On the road last year. All right, so again, 321 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns. On the road, 218 passing yards per game and 1.38 passing touchdowns per game. Whether it's the outdoor atmosphere they play in, both in Carolina and also Tampa Bay, and also the 5 other road games they have. Of course, Atlanta is inside every year. It just seems like the home road split is a thing. There are some quarterbacks can break the trend, like Big Ben last year, but it seems to be a thing for Drew Brees.
I also think there's one more thing, which is he's done remarkably with the shoulder. Had that injury back in San Diego, and you've sort of forgot about how bad that was. People who thought he'd never play football again. But he has a damaged rotator cuff, and he's been remarkable despite that. But I was really interested in how much is he going downfield. And I think I found his average depth of target is like 4th lowest in the NFL last year. So I think this shorter passes is also a way to sustain your career when you're a guy with an older shoulder.
Sure. Yeah, I'm generally okay with quarterbacks' average depth of target being shorter in fantasy because it typically correlates with plenty of yards after the catch.
Right.
And just as we saw with Patrick Mahomes last year, amazing.
Right.
Don't misconstrue that. But there were also some incredible big plays that were
But I think that's what we've
of.
thought of Drew Brees is being able to get it down the field, and he's just not doing it as much anymore.
Again, no issue with Drew Brees as your starting quarterback going into the season. I would just say that if people are using a premier quarterback pick, like a top 5 selection on Drew Brees, there might be other options that present even more upside. I want to give you a list of all the players in NFL history, every single one of them, that have consecutive seasons with 700-plus rushing yards and 700-plus receiving yards. Marshall Faulk, who did it for 4 straight years because he's ridiculous. Herschel Walker, who could probably still bench press 225 50 times today. He did it from 86 and then again in 87. The other player, Alvin Kamara. Been in the league for 2 years, been a major factor for them in 2 straight years. The only question on Alvin Kamara is this: we love him. Mike, if you had 1.01, the very first pick in the draft, how would you make the case to select Alvin Kamara?
Well, I mean, you're putting me on this in a weird spot because I'm taking Saquon Barkley there.
I understand. If you had to make the case.
Yeah, if I had to make the case, well, you kind of just laid out how effective he's been in this high-scoring Saints offense. But, last season, we saw his workload take a little bit of a step forward, right? Top 8 in snaps, touches, scrimmage yards, offensive touchdowns with 18 fantasy points. And he also had the second highest OTD or expected touchdown total behind only some guy named Todd Gurley, meaning he was getting volume near the goal line. You like that a lot. Now, we're going to talk about Latavius Murray in a minute. He's obviously going to be involved in that area, but they throw to Kamara a ton, 81 catches each of his 2 seasons. The one area where he's kind of limited so far is as a ball carrier. He has not reached 200 carries yet in his career. I think he might get over that number this season, but I don't think he's going to fly past it. I mean, they've said that first month last season, remember Mark Ingram was suspended and Kamara got a lot of this volume in that first month. They said they're not doing that again. He's going to stay in that role we saw after, from week 5 on last season. So, nonetheless, that's enough. He's efficient enough. He's good enough. The offense is good enough. The offense runs enough that he can still be a top 3, top 2, perhaps the first overall scorer or top scorer in fantasy. So, I mean, I guess that's the case. I mean,
listen, here's what I would say is I don't think he will go, and Daniel's going to chime in a second here, but I doubt Kamara will go number 1 overall in many drafts other than those that take place somewhere, in the bayou, right? But if you did, if someone did so, I would not mock them for taking Alvin Kamara number 1 overall. I think if you look at the players that are being considered for the number 1 pick, I think there are 4, assuming Zeke Elliott returns before the season begins. Zeke, Kamara, Barkley, and Gurley.
No doubt.
I think you
Gurley?
I'm sorry.
McCaffrey.
Sorry.
I know. I was
we need a segment on that.
I'm going to get to Todd Gurley here in a second. What I was going to say is that of those 4 offenses, I think we have the most implicit trust in the Saints to be scoring the most touchdowns. So back to your OTD idea, it's just like the running back that will be nearest to the end zone most frequently is Alvin Kamara. Daniel, what say you?
Kyle has one good stat on Kamara that is not positive, and it's the only one out there. And I'm just curious, Mike, what your numbers say. Last year, he only had 1 of his 194 carries go for more than 20 yards. Like, that seems outrageous.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah, it's a weird stat for Alvin Kamara to have.
Which is strange because, A, he's an outstanding kickoff return man. They don't use him there anymore. But remember, I think it was rookie season against Tampa Bay, and he doesn't look like he's running fast, and he just glides right past everybody. And B, he's also in the passing game. What do you make of that?
My thought would be regression to the mean. I mean, we know he's good. Like sometimes he's a really good football player. You can see that in the numbers on the field. I mean, he has elite efficiency without big plays. I mean, that's the sort of number that you get 1 extra block you could take off.
I was going to say, my other thought is he's awesome. Not the most physical runner. And that, he's not breaking tackles in the same way that Saquon Barkley is, or Zeke Elliott is breaking tackles, which sometimes 20-yard runs, as Mike said, are sprung by 1 good block or some poor tackling effort. I love Alvin Kamara, though. You take him number 1 overall, I'm good with it. The backup to Alvin Kamara usually carries some value because, as Sean Payton has made it clear, we're not going to necessarily ride Kamara harder just because we have no more Mark Ingram. They have a useful player in Latavius Murray, who actually got a pretty decent contract this offseason. So the conversation surrounding most valuable handcuff running back, I think, in the NFL, taking away guys that are presently injured or guys like Austin Eckler and whoever you believe the Cowboys backup to be because, Melvin Gordon and Zeke are gone. amongst the healthy running backs, is there a more valuable handcuff than Latavius Murray in the NFL?
No. In fact, I ranked him 1 to 32 about a month ago in an article. He was number 1 for me. So
How about
I'm with
that?
you there. Yeah. I totally agree with you. In fact, do we have an official running back of the podcast? Because he is like the definition of mediocrity in terms of efficiency.
Oh,
Like, if
wow.
you-
I didn't know you were going with that one, Mike.
I
Right?
wasn't sure either, but
Right?
boy,
I mean,
look at cut to Latavius
Jordan
Murray
Howard's been on the
going,
show together
You're
with
calling me
us.
mediocre.
Who else has been on the show recently? Howard's been on the show.
Yeah, recently I think that's been the only one that's like been a.
well, I love Jordan Howard.
Well, Latavius Murray ain't coming on now.
Well, no, I mean it's not a bad thing. I mean it's above replacement level, but it's just consistency, right? His yards per carry the past 4 seasons has not dropped between 3.9 or been above 4.13. Just the incredible consistency. Is also his receiving yardage have been very similar, just following a pretty straight line so far. But the one area where he does stand out is scoring. I don't think people realize this. Since 2015, second in the NFL in rushing touchdowns with 32. He's 4th in rushing OTD, or expected touchdown total, and 5th in carries inside the 5. And by the way, last season, the Saints, 33 carries inside the 5. That was 4 more than any other team. This guy is that big back complement. He can push for, I'd say, I am at 138 carries this season. He'll get a handful of targets as well. I think there is some standalone value here as maybe in 12 teamers, maybe a borderline flex. And as you mentioned, an elite handcuff, so definitely mid-round value here.
29 years old, the guy that had light tread on the tires at the beginning of his career. Remember, everybody wanted him to be something in Oakland.
Yep.
6 foot, 2.5, 220 pounds. The guy runs like the wind.
Mm-hmm.
And he finally had a breakout moment on Thursday night against the Chiefs a few years ago when the Raiders upset Kansas City, goes to Minnesota, has a couple of reasonable seasons. Definitely a value, the Saints, to sort of further that notion.
By the way, he stepped up when Dalvin Cook was not able to. But, if you're looking at it like, could he be, how valuable would he be if for some reason they were without Kamara?
Yeah.
I think he's shown that already.
And
He'd be an RB1.
The Saints certainly have a tendency. They have an excellent offensive line. It's physical and mauling. Number 1 in rushing touchdowns last year. 3rd in overall rush percentage. 4th in red zone rush percentage, 5th in rushes per game. They take a lot of snaps on offense because they're really good, and they find a way to run the football effectively. Latavius Murray, certainly a player that is draftable in all leagues. Mike Thomas, I think, by most people's standards, is also draftable in all leagues. You know who has more catches than Mike Thomas through the first 3 years of his NFL career?
No one?
Nobody. Mike Thomas, absolutely insane. Last year, he had a league-high 6 games with 10 or more catches in 2018. Think about that. That's week winner for you in most cases. Like, there were times where it was, I'm playing Mike Thomas, like, just wave the white flag once the Saints game had concluded. Mike, you've got him at wide receiver 3. I've got him at wide receiver 4. His average draft position is wide receiver 1. This is our first time having you on the show since we got going again last week. Do you sort of view, whereas in running backs, it feels like, again, assuming Zeke is there, it's a 4-man tier and it's pretty clear. Do you feel as though with these wide receivers, they're somewhat interchangeable, somewhere between like 1 and 6 or 7? Because if you told me, again, Mike Thomas was your number 1 wide receiver this year, you know what I would say? Cool. He's pretty sweet.
Yeah, I have Tyreek Hill 6th, and he was the top scoring fantasy receiver last year. And there's no reason to really think he's going to fall off significantly, right? He's a workhorse in that offense. So you're right. Adams, Hopkins, Thomas, Jones, Beckham, and Hill. I have no issue with any of them going
Who's
first.
7th for you? Who's right next?
7th is Smith-Schuster and then Antonio Brown.
Okay, I agree with that then. So those first 6 are the guys that you're kind of focusing in on. Any of them could be, and I heard Matthew, by the way, check out the Adam Schefter podcast. Mm-hmm. Matthew Berry was amongst the guests on there today, along with our friends Evan Silva and Adam Levitan. I heard Matthew make the case that, like, Odell Beckham Jr. could have, he was saying, it's not banking on it, but like a scenario exists where Odell could have the single greatest fantasy wide receiver season ever. 6 awesome targets at the top of draft board. So Mike Thomas, I mean, no issue with him going number 1 overall amongst wide receivers. The question is probably not where he best slots amongst wide receivers. The question for all those guys is probably, where do you take them relative to the very tip of the top running backs? You know, like at what point do you go, is it pick 4 that you consider a wide receiver? Is it pick 6? At what point do you begin the wide receiver train?
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhere right around the middle because we just listed all the running backs that we would have at the top with Alvin Kamara. And I think there's a drop off after that point where I start going, you know what? Now I'm looking at a top wide receiver. And if Michael Thomas is there, DeAndre Hopkins, like these are the guys I'm looking at. I'm middle of the round. I'd probably go with them.
Yeah, I think I'd probably around 7 or 8 would be where I start with the wide receiver.
Interesting. I'm thinking about it at 4 right now, just because you have Barkley, McCaffrey, and Kamara, and then you're uncertain on Zeke. So if you were like, maybe you got bit by Le'Veon Bell last season and you don't want to draft him, maybe then you think about going to a DeAndre Hopkins or Devontae Adams. I would probably take Zeke there, and then you have, it's kind of like David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell is that next tier, and you have to decide you want to take that risk on a older running back, right? Kind of coming off a bizarre 2018 season, or do you want to pivot to it's a relative term.
He had one year that he didn't actually play, basically.
Yeah.
He was hurt.
Still, you know what I mean?
Listen, Saquon's 22?
It's all relative.
27, so yeah.
27 is above average.
Oh, you're talking about Le'Veon being older.
Well, they're at the same age. Johnson and Bell are the same age. And
Johnson was a late arrival to the NFL.
Late arrival and missed a
Iowa.
season. Yeah.
But again, it's relative. I'm just saying relative to these other guys. They're a little bit older and coming off bad 2018 season. So if you want to go, listen, you could easily make the case at the top, the number one receiver is safer than a Bell or a Johnson or a running back altogether. So that's all I'm saying.
We have this dartboard in this studio. I'm not sure what it's actually for. Does it belong to us? Does it belong to Will Kane? I don't know. It's over there. It's always closed, so you can't actually throw darts. But imagine you were if I gifted you a dart and you had the chance to throw it at somebody. Not at Matthew, at a player, like at a player on the Saints who catches footballs, who plays wide receiver, that's not Michael Thomas. At what point do you do it, and who is the player that you most covet? Is it Traquan Smith, Ted Ginn Jr.,
It's, somebody
else?
Yeah, it's Traquan Smith for me, but here's my fear is that we're going to draft Traquan Smith, we're going to put him on our bench, and then by week 3, it's going to be Ted Ginn again, just like last season. I mean, Ted Ginn put together 2 top 35 fantasy wide receiver seasons in 3 years, and last year was on pace for another wide receiver 3-year flex season before he got injured. Traquan flashed against my Eagles when they totally destroyed them in the regular season. Remember, he had 10 catches, 157 yards, and a touchdown on 13 targets. And we thought, here it is. You know, this third-round pick we all love, downfield threat, good size, 6'2". He's breaking out, and it just didn't happen after that. He kind of disappeared again. So maybe he gets a shot this year. But I'll tell you what, Mike Triplett, who does an A-plus job covering this team, he's struggling to get behind him, it seems like. Right? He just doesn't see that. He wants to caution fantasy owners, I think, were his words at. We all want him to break out, but he's not there just yet. So for me, just an end of bench stash right now.
And by the way, Mike, who listens to the podcast daily, is a fantasy junkie. So when he says,
he's always looking with that in mind.
Yeah.
Smart. One thing I'd say about Ted Ginn, when people are like, why Ted Ginn? This is like not that, like this is basically surface level, but I don't think it's discussed enough, is like the reason why Ted Ginn continues to play is like his value to the Saints extends beyond like the number of catches. Like the guy is flipping fast.
Right.
Like,
he's a big play guy too.
Well, just every single snap. Even you can run Ted Ginn straight down the field, and that can change the way that the defense has to defend the other 10 players on your offense. So again, for fantasy purposes, not bending over backwards for Ted Ginn. I'm just mentioning why he continues to play as much as he does despite maddening drops and inconsistent production in the box score. Jared Cook, speaking of inconsistent production, was the Raiders' unquestioned MVP last year according to John Gruden. Now, you can say that might be damning with faint praise. I'd agree with you. That being said, he's entered a really, really nice role here in New Orleans because somebody needs to catch passes at the tight end spot. Mike, you've got him at tight end 7. I have him at tight end 6. His ADP amongst tight ends is also tight end 7. I think once you get past those top 3 tight ends, and maybe you can throw Evan Ingram in there, I think basically everybody else becomes a lot more dependent upon touchdowns and not catches, right? I mean, Hunter Henry, I can't imagine him going for 85 catches this year. I can't imagine I don't think Jared Cook will go for 85 catches. So how much confidence do you have in Jared Cook? Because although we do like the idea of him being a big play threat in this New Orleans offense, Kobe Fleener has been there before. I think we've seen the Saints double down on tight ends and not necessarily get what you want out of them.
Well, we just talked about Mike Triplett, right? And he's gun shy on Traquan Smith, and he still has he's still a little gun shy after what happened with Fleener.
Yep.
He's in on Cook. He thinks he is going to have a tremendous season, and he cautions himself. He's worried because of what happened with Fleener. He still loves the Cook situation here. Look, Cook, and here's how I kind of look at the tight end position. You have Kelsey on his own tier, then you have Ertz and Kittle. And then that next 3, I had Ingram, Henry, and Howard kind of in that tier. Cook's in that conversation now, I think he's right in that tier. So if you're looking at round 6 or 7 to attack tight end, I think he's a perfectly fine target. Keep in mind, Cook has averaged a target share of 16 to 18% each of the past 7 seasons. That's really hard to do, to stay right in that little area 7 straight seasons. If he hits that in New Orleans, he is a lock for tight end 1 numbers. It'll be impossible to get that much volume in this offense and not be a top 10 tight end. So I like him. I think he's right in that mid tight end 1 conversation.
16 to 18%. So about a sixth of the targets. If Drew Brees attempts 650 passes next year, over 100 targets in line for Jared Cook. A reminder, Taysom Hill has quarterback eligibility only in ESPN fantasy leagues. If you're playing in the two quarterback league, I would actually consider Taysom Hill ahead of some of the bottom tier quarterbacks that are starters that are actually going to get drafted this. Maybe not, but my point is this, is make sure that if you're playing a 2 quarterback league and you get in a major pinch, just pick him up.
Fun trivia for you. Where did he align most last season? Where did most of his snaps come from?
The slot?
Tight end. Yeah,
Tight end.
basically. Yeah, it was. I mean, you could distinguish all of those. Most of them came at tight end, believe it or not.
I was telling this to the guys before the show, is as much as sometimes Taysom Hill can be maddening because, first of all, Drew Brees is awesome. Second of all, like, he's all over the place. It just looks, you're not used to number 7. The people in the NFL love Taysom Hill because he makes a job very difficult for a defensive coordinator who's trying to decide, is he a running back? Is he a wide receiver? Is he a quarterback? Is he a flex? Taysom Hill, useful player. One of the good things about Mike's role on the Daily Wager is that he gets paid a ton of money to do so. He has a huge house. And for that huge house, he has just one way to protect it, with ADT, which, Mike, I'd love for you to tell us more about right now.
You're exactly right. Actually, I've had ADT for a long time, even when I lived in Pennsylvania. So
Wow.
I can understand why I'm reading this live read right now, Daniel. I appreciate that. The Fantasy Football Podcast, of course, is brought to you by ADT. What does real protection mean for our listeners? Well, it means a lot. You can get all of the latest innovation in smart home security from ADT, combined with 24/7 monitoring from the most trusted name in home security. You get a team of professionals designing and installing a secure smart home just for you. Again, I was a pain. I moved. They had to do this multiple times, and they did an excellent job. You get 18,000 employees safeguarding you with connection to first responders. You get the nation's #1 smart home security provider. You can get a secure smart home with everything from video doorbells, indoor and outdoor cameras, smart locks, and lights, controlled from the ADT app or from the sound of your voice. You can get professionally monitored carbon monoxide and smoke detectors. I have those as well. You can get a system custom designed to fit your home. You can get safety on the go, in the car, or when the kids are at school with the ADT Go app with an SOS button. So, that about wraps it up. Thanks to ATD for sponsoring the podcast and for protecting my family. I have 2 little kids. I mean, I need the protection when they're sleeping.
Wait, you have a 6-bedroom home with a moat and 2 kids?
I do.
Isn't there some sort of equation that you're only allowed to have, like, you multiply your children by 1.5, and that's how many bedrooms you're allowed to have, Daniel?
It's funny because I went to Mike's house the other day, and he actually has a bridge over top of a brook in his property. And I was
serious?
Like, yeah. Like, I don't understand. Like, him and Matthew both have bridges at their homes. Like, how weird is that?
It's good to be the king, Clay. Before we get to the Panthers, just wanted to take a quick, indulgent moment to welcome back our friend, Ed Werder, to the ESPN family. If you missed it, go check it out. Ed has been a longtime supporter of fantasy football. You'll see him all over the place, hopefully including fantasy football now.
I know, because there might be, he is just one of the best at giving us those live reports on Sundays.
Welcome back, Ed, and we'll be right back.
Fantasy, you're in the 06010. Focus. Fantasy focus.
All right, Vegas has the Panthers at 7.5 wins. They have gone over and under this number for 7 straight seasons. They were under last year. Injuries played a part in that. Mike, your Vegas win total for the Panthers, or whatever, your own win total for the Panthers is?
7.5. Not even joking. Right on the money.
Wow.
Right. So Vegas is correct.
Are you smarter than Vegas?
Saying.
So you do not see. This is since I'm a gambling expert now,
right?
Which I'm totally not, by the way. I just do the projections. We compare them to the lines, but you would not take this. You would stay away from this one because there's going to be juice. So it's going to be like -110.
Well, look at you.
So you just stay away. See, I'm learning. Doug Kazarian is teaching me well. I'm starting to learn all the lingo here. So you would stay away from this one because They are. They're right on the money, I think.
Okay, let's get to the Carolina Panthers and begin with Cam Newton. If you didn't listen to last Friday's podcast, you're a moron. Stephania returned. It was awesome, all right? Stephania emptied out the notebook. The Cliff Notes version on Cam Newton's prognosis for this season because of that shoulder injury, Stephania, is...
I expect him to have a bounce-back season. And because what you saw last year was compensation for a shoulder that was hurting and he didn't have full range of motion. So people talk about these mechanics. Well, he literally could not get his arm over his head. They went in and cleaned up the joint. Now he has this beautiful range of motion. And really at this point, I spoke with Ryan Vermillion, who's their head athletic trainer down there. He says it's just a matter of building up his endurance for games. So, they want to be able to have him look that good for 4 quarters, and they want him to make smarter decisions. I think when we were discussing this last week, the takeaway was, yeah, we've heard this before, like Cam's not going to run, he's still going to run. No. They've done that experiment. They want Cam to run, and they expect him to run. They just want him to make smarter decisions when he does run. If this is not for a touchdown, like, you don't need to dive with your arm outstretched. Be smart about it. Slide or get out of bounds. So I think that's what they're working on from that end in terms of decision making, but not trying to take away his run game by any means. So I think you're going to see, and there's just something different. He is focused. He's quieter. He went on a diet. Everything sounds like a more mature Cam who understands that, hey, this can get taken away from you. And I do think he's primed for a really good year. I really like him this year.
So Cam Newton we were talking about earlier about like maybe Drew Brees is being a bit overdrafted because of the name and some of the things that we associate him with in fantasy football. I think it's possible that Cam Newton is being underdrafted right now. I've got him at quarterback 5. You got him at quarterback 6, Mike. His ADP is now quarterback 8, close to Drew Brees and Carson Wentz. Now, I understand that there are very few quarterbacks that have been starting for 8 straight years. But just to give you a picture of what Cam Newton has done in his 8 seasons, he's had at least 90 rushing attempts and 4 touchdowns in all 8 of his NFL seasons. So he averages 5.2 yards per carry. Off of his running alone, the floor is set at close to like an extra 75 points per season on top of whatever he gets as a passer. Meanwhile, last year, he evolved in a significant way as a passer. By far his best year in terms of accuracy, Mike. Stephania likes what he brings to the table from a health standpoint. How bullish are you on Cam Newton this season? Very.
I think he's, especially if you're in a league where people are getting smarter and evolving into people who will wait at quarterback, this is an excellent target. QB8, I mean, if you're in a 10 or 12 team league, he's going to fall to potentially the double-digit rounds in some drafts, and that's where I've landed him. And you mentioned that we talked a little bit earlier about it's okay to be more conservative throwing the ball and letting your playmakers make those plays. And last year, he posted a career-low average depth of throw at 7.3, career high in completion percentage for him at 68%. Who knew? Imagine that. Right. 5 years ago, a 68% completion percentage for Cam Newton, only off target 14% of the time, both of those career highs. And I'll tell you what, the new plan worked. There's a lot here, but I'll just give you a few of these. When he got through week 13, remember he got hurt late in the season. Yeah. Stephania, you just talked about that. Through week 13, he was 3rd in fantasy points at quarterback. He had 2 or more passing touchdowns in 11 straight games leading into week 14. The Panthers were also the pass heaviest they've ever been during the Cam Newton era last season at 62%. And again, you kind of just touched on this, but even missing 2 games, still top 5 at the position in carries, rushing yards, and rushing touchdowns for the 8th consecutive season. The guy can do it all. I still think he has another season or 3 left of elite fantasy production. I think he's a great target if you wait at quarterback.
I'm with you as well. To borrow Matthew's old line, or his favorite saying is, by hook or by crook, Cam Newton will find his way to fantasy relevance. You mentioned the completion percentage going way up last year. 67.9% of his passes completed. His first year under Norv and Scott Turner have done a great job. How about in the red zone specifically? Remember, in the red zone, reduced field, in some ways you can be more error prone as a quarterback. 66.7% in the red zone. 3rd most accurate quarterback in the red zone in 2018, behind only Drew Brees and Andrew Luck, after being 27th in 2017. So good to see Cam Newton making so many strides, like the value there going into this season. Now back to the player who pretty much doesn't need any introduction. Run CMC, Christian McCaffrey, running back 2 on Mike's board, running back 2 on my board, the 2nd drafted running back based on ADP. His overall ADP is also 2nd. This guy's unbelievable. Just when we thought, he was fun to watch his rookie season. but he was not a particularly efficient runner. Last year, he just blistered all of whatever sort of recaps you had from 2018 or 2017. Can't break enough tackles, not powerful enough between the tackles. The guy is just going to be too much of a big play in space guy, but not necessarily a grind out yards. No, Christian McCaffrey came back with a vengeance last season.
No doubt, 5 yards per carry, 2.1 after contact, which is more of a key number for me. That tells me that he was better after initial contact, was able to elude some of those guys and make up yardage. So like that a lot. Played 97% of their snaps through week 16. He would have actually been the number one scoring running back if he didn't rest for about 3/4 of that week 17 game. So he was obviously tremendous. Number one at running back in targets, receptions, and receiving yards. 5+ touchdown catches in both of his seasons. And as we know, his carry load increased last season. This is a good offense. As just mentioned, they scored 2+ touchdowns every game through week 14 last season.
That's why C.J. Anderson was sitting there looking like, okay, because the plan was that they would rotate him in, and they just never wanted to take McCaffrey off the field. And they've kind of reiterated that they are confirmed we like the ball in McCaffrey's hands. Ron Rivera said that. So I don't think that opportunity for him, it's gonna be predominantly McCaffrey.
I get it. People sometimes think we choose arbitrary thresholds, but here's a somewhat non-arbitrary threshold. 80 catches, that's 5 catches per game. 5 receiving touchdowns, that's hard to do. Amongst players with at least 80 catches and 5 receiving touchdowns in each of the past 2 seasons, there are 6 in total. Antonio Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, Keenan Allen, Travis Kelce, Mike Thomas. Those guys are all paid to catch the football. The other one is Christian McCaffrey, who also happens to run the ball for a living. As Kyle notes, last year, if you just took his receiving stats, evaporated the rushing stats, they went away into a fantasy football ether, he would have been wide receiver 16 in fantasy.
Amazing.
How about
Crazy.
that? That is ridiculous. Wide receiver 16, if just taking his receiving stats, I'd imagine his rushing stats would account and put him up pretty close to like a top 25 running back.
And something
season.
that's so hard to quantify is quickness. Like I've tried to figure out like how can you measure that, and you really can't. But when you see a guy who's as physical as he is proven that he can be by breaking tackles and quick, it's like he can be elusive and power at the same time. Very unique.
Here's where things get really interesting for Carolina is they've got a lot of young wide receivers that are intriguing, specifically DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel. The latter, Samuel, turned, I believe, 23 yesterday. Happy birthday to Curtis Samuel. And also has been generating a lot of preseason hype. However, our ADPs and our rankings suggest that we are more in on Curtis Moore. We are more in on, I'm on DJ Moore, excuse me. I have him at 23. Mike has him at 23. Brilliant. And he's wide receiver 29 in terms of ADP. Mike, there's a lot for me to like in DJ Moore. The surface was just scratched last year. Touchdowns were elusive for him, but I anticipate the volume to go way up this season.
Yeah, it gave me a Golden Tate sort of feel last season, right? I mean, you saw him promoted into a full-time role in Week 8. From that point forward, 6.2 targets and 4.2 catches per game was fantasy football's wide receiver 20 the rest of the way. But where did he stand out? A lot like Golden Tate. After the catch, 7.7 yards after the catch. That was best in the entire NFL at wide receiver. I mean, he was tremendous with the ball in his hands. However, again, like Golden Tate, only 2 touchdowns. And by the way, that was not a fluke. 2.2 expected touchdown total or OTD. Did not get the ball near the goal line. A guy we're about to talk to soaked up a lot of those. So we'll talk about that in a second. But also added 172 rushing yards, which offset the lack of touchdowns. So at the end of the day, remember, this guy was the first wide receiver picked in the 2018 draft. They have every reason to make him their number one. I think they'll give him an opportunity. I think the touchdown ceiling could be a little bit limited, just the way he's utilized. But at the end of the day, there's no doubt he can give you wide receiver 2 numbers.
Incredible time speed during his playing career at Maryland. It was reinforced during the combine. I think he might have not participated in the combine because he had that injury. But in any event, you knew he was fast. Last year, we confirmed that he was fast. Here's a great stat that Kyle pulled. He led all receivers amongst yards per catch after the reception last year. So from the time that he caught the ball, on average, he gained an additional 7.69 yards, nearly a first down after every catch that he made last season. DJ Moore is explosive. He's fast. Cam Newton's improved as a passer. The touchdowns are going to improve this year, but it seems like there's more buzz this season amongst Curtis Samuel. Funny, was he generating some hype when you were down there in Spartansburg?
He was definitely generating hype. They love how he looks in camp this year. And I know we were talking before the show. It's like, well, good camp. We want to see it during the season. But don't forget, his rookie year. He had that ankle injury in week 10, then was placed on injured reserve. And then last year, he missed the games because of having a surgery to address an irregular heartbeat. So it's kind of unfair. He went from missing time at the end all the way through to starting late. And we haven't gotten to see a full season of Curtis Samuel. Talk about fast. This kid is fast. He's got blazing speed, 4.31 40 time. I think that Curtis Samuel has the chance to break out, and I think it makes it a tougher decision for me in terms of who's going to end up being the most valuable in Carolina as wide receiver.
Daniel's trying to put Kyle on the hot seat by passing along this stat. He's got 95 speed and 93 acceleration in Madden NFL 20. So, Mike, a lot of people in the industry, respected voices, people whose opinions we take with a lot of it comes with stature and it comes with credence, are in on Curtis Samuel this year. I have a wide receiver 38. I'm sure you include me
in that group.
Yeah, okay. Including Stephania. Mike has him at wide receiver 41. His ADP is 44. I think where I'm having a harder time seeing it is whereas I envision DJ Moore, I expect him to push for like 115 or 120 targets this year. I think Curtis Samuel might be more of a maybe like 80 to 90 target player.
Yep, 84 for me, plus 12 catches. So, yeah.
What's happened to you, Phil?
Right on the money.
Projection master. What can I say?
Stat nerd. Hashtag stat nerd over
stat
here.
Nerd. That's right.
Yeah, came out of your mom's basement for that one. Anyway, yeah, Samuel, I'm actually a little bit lower than you guys, but I see somewhat of the appeal. Here's the negatives here. 10 missed games so far, obviously. We have that. You just addressed that. 54 catches in 2 seasons. That's where he's been limited. And again, year 2 is pretty much the breakout year for wide receivers. Year 3 is the deadline, if you will, for most guys. So we'll see if he can turn the corner. The efficiency, not great so far. 59% catch rate, only 6.6 yards per target, 3 yards after the catch on average. So you want to see better there. And also last season, I mentioned, he had more work near the goal line than DJ Moore. 4.4 was his expected touchdown total. He had 7.
Yeah.
So he's a regression in the mean candidate if we've ever seen one, likely to come back to earth. And he played over 60% of the snaps in 5 games, was wide receiver 32. So I don't see the comparisons to being on Moore's level in fantasy. Maybe he does take a leap forward. He gets more work downfield and gets a little bit more work near the goal line, but I'm a little more hesitant than
I think he's also playing with a different quarterback this year. There was a window of time because Cam actually originally got hurt in the Eagles game. Not many people are really aware of that. And then when it got to the point where it was really bad, it was later in the season. So I think the dynamic will change there in terms of wide receivers. You got a healthy Curtis Samuel and a healthy Cam Newton throwing the ball. I think the downfield throws are going to increase this year.
One more player on the Panthers offense to keep an eye on this season is, of course, Greg Olsen, who returned. Greg is going to be a very good analyst in his own right in the media when he decides to do that post-football. But for now, he remains a Panther. Mike, you've got him at tight end 15. I've got him at tight end 13. His ADP is tight end 13. So not being drafted as a starter in most leagues. Do we think that the volume days for Greg Olsen are just sort of behind him?
To some extent. I mean, you look at his usage over the past 16 games, right? It's been down, but he still posted a 44-catch, 482-yard, 5-touchdown line during those 16 games, essentially a full season. That would have been tight end 14 last season, right? Yeah. So it's not what we're used to with him because the previous 7 seasons, or the previous 5 seasons, he was top 7 in fantasy points every season. So it's definitely a bit of a step down. Obviously, he was fighting injuries during that span, but he is 34 now, and it's a different offense than it was a few years ago with guys like Moore and Samuel and McCaffrey. So, I'm with you. I think the target share will be a little lower. Maybe you could flirt with tight end 1 numbers, but I'm late round tight end pick.
I still think he's going to be like this guy, this outlet for Cam in the end zone. But people forget that last year, in addition to the refracture of his foot, he had really bad plantar fasciitis. Like, it hurts to walk across the floor. He was telling me when I was at camp how painful it was. He said, forget the fracture. That actually wasn't that bad after a couple of weeks, but his foot, and then when it ended up rupturing, that's when he finished his season in December. So, he's not a guy who's going to run a lot or have a lot of burst. I think some of that has fallen off, but I still think he is that value for Cam in the red zone. So I would expect his touchdowns to go up a bit.
I don't say this with a pejorative context here. Just that sort of sounds like what Jason Witten was for Dak Prescott last time we saw him, which has limited fantasy value, but might during bye weeks.
Huge value being on the field for the Carolina Panthers, but fantasy value down for us.
All right, Stephania, why don't you tell us about ZipRecruiter before we close out the show with a couple of questions?
I will.
All right.
Hiring used to be hard.
So I've heard.
Multiple job sites, stacks of resumes, a very confusing review process. But today, hiring can be easy, and you only have to go to one place to get it done. That's ZipRecruiter.com/06010. ZipRecruiter sends your job to over 100 of the web's leading job boards, but they don't stop there. With their powerful matching technology, ZipRecruiter scans thousands of resumes to find people with the right experience and invites them to apply to your job. As applications come in, ZipRecruiter analyzes each one, spotlights the top candidates so you never miss a great match. ZipRecruiter is so effective that 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site within the first day. And right now, our listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free at this exclusive web address.
You did it wrong.
ZipRecruiter.com/06010. That's ZipRecruiter.com/06010. ZipRecruiter.com/06010.
We go to the arbiter. Daniel, what say you?
Yeah, tell me how you say it again? How much does it cost, Stephania?
For free, except for I can't hear you because your little mic to me is not working.
Oh,
so
sorry
I know
about
you were
that.
trying to.
You got to put the emphasis on free.
For free.
For free.
No, that's his. I'm not going to steal his way of doing things.
Matthew Berry made a career out of stealing people's thunder.
Are you calling me Matthew Berry?
Would you take that personally? I'm kidding. We laugh.
I might not be
Love
back
you.
tomorrow.
Matthew might. Oh, Matthew is not back tomorrow. Matthew is back
No,
tomorrow.
None of us are
we're
here.
on a TV
We're
show
not
tomorrow.
here.
Tomorrow we're on a TV show. The
TV.
bright lights come out, and all of a sudden Matthew goes on the little, the small screen. He's in. All right. Before we wrap up the show, Keith has some questions for us. What do you got, Keith?
Justin wants to know, news or noise on the Chiefs potentially going with a committee backfield this season?
I think we had a little bit of this conversation last week. I still feel so. Andy Reid did say on Friday, I believe it was, that he's willing to go with a bit more of a committee. I'm still drafting Damian Williams like the clear-cut starter personally.
I think he would be the first running back I would take in Kansas City, but I'm not taking him in round 2 or 3. I mean, that is crazy early.
Down your rankings.
Yeah, he's never had more than 50 carries or 23 receptions.
A little bit of a hamstring issue to start camp. Don't like that.
Also, we like Carlos Hyde, right?
Yeah, well.
Former 49er.
Former Brown. Wore my bless him shirt today.
Yeah.
Keith, what else you got for us?
Yeah, the next one here is the blind eye wants to know, if you load up on running backs early, who is the wide receiver lowest down your ranks that you feel comfortable with as your wide receiver 1? Essentially, what's your cutoff point?
Wide receiver 1.
Man.
So I'd imagine you're going to be talking about players somewhere in the tier of like 13 to 18, which would be the guys that are in the vein of Julian Edelman, maybe the 2 Vikings wide receivers, perhaps one of the Rams' top wide receivers, Robert Woods or Brandon Cooks. Yep. Maybe if you're super optimistic on him, Kenny Golladay, like Daniel is.
I'm definitely cutting off before Alshon.
Yeah, I'd say ahead of Alshon, the volume's too low. I would think maybe my cutoff would be somewhere around Brandon Cooks.
Yeah, I like Cooks. I think Thielen makes a lot of sense there. Diggs was 10th last year. I love the Edelman name for sure. Would not shock me at all if he finished top 10 if he's healthy. The guy I like, if I go running back, the guy I'm really looking for in 3 is Amari Cooper. I think he's going to have a tremendous season with Dak Prescott in Dallas this season, so I like that call at all. He was getting you wide receiver 1 numbers last season once he settled in with the Cowboys.
Yeah, a little inconsistent. We talked about it on the Double Trouble last week, but Amari Cooper talent is certainly there. He helps the money.
And you get a full
too.
season. He's at a full training camp like that.
Keith?
Yeah, next one comes from Mike. Who scores not Mike Clay, though.
Yeah.
Oh,
we are looking for an answer from Mike, though, if you can get that. Who scores most touchdowns this season? Mark Ingram, David Montgomery, or Marlon Mack?
Marlon Mack, it's not close.
Most touchdowns? Who is it? Mack,
Montgomery, and Ingram.
Yeah, it's Mack for sure.
Yeah.
He had
Marlon
10
last year.
10 last season, yeah.
I'm nervous about both David Montgomery and Mark Ingram. And I say nervous, I mean would it stun me if by the midseason, Justice Hill is getting some run for the Ravens? No, wouldn't stun me. Yep. And David Montgomery, I like him. It's fun to watch. He has been really good. I remind people, Mike Davis is a useful player. Tariq Cohen had 80-plus catches last year. David Montgomery he's going to have to be leaps and bounds better than them to have a dominant workload. Anything else, Keith? One more?
Yeah, I got a couple more here.
Here we go.
Nika is picking 9th and in a snake draft 10-teamer.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
From that slot, would you be targeting wide receiver start or running back wide receiver start?
Oh, boy. Ooh. Daniel is going to raise his hand to object.
I'm going to weigh in here really quickly because I just did a video with Golick Jr. Last week where we talked about draft strategy for snakes, and I go through and do a number of mock drafts with both of those strategies just to see how they play out, because I think mock drafting is so important when you're looking at the If I go running back, what are my wide receivers going to look like? If I go wide receiver, what are my running backs going to look like? And then I kind of compare all the teams and say, it looks like this strategy gave me the team I'm most comfortable with when I go through and do that.
So what'd you find?
Yeah.
I found that I really enjoy going running back because I think the wide receiver is a deep enough position in a PPR league that you can fill in some guys, and I feel confident with these top-tier running backs for my first 2 picks.
Typical caveats apply, right? Depending on how the board has gone up to pick 9. But speaking generally, I am not leaving the first 2 rounds without at least one stud running back.
Yeah.
And depending how the wide receivers look at that 9th spot, I might take the wide receiver first and pick up the running back second.
Yeah, but plus I kind of found a soft spot in that round 3 to 4 territory for running backs. I really like Josh Jacobs. You have Henry in there, Freeman, Fournette, Kerryon Johnson's in that conversation now. So I don't mind going receiver running back there and then coming around and hopefully get one of those guys.
Great. All right, one more to bring us home, Keith.
Yeah, another strategy question from Cindy. She wants to know, how would you adjust your draft strategy for a 16-team league as opposed to the 10 or 12 team?
A couple of things here. I just make sure that when you're playing a 16-team league, you emphasize some of the spots a little bit earlier than you normally do. Right. So like tight ends and quarterbacks took a bit more of a premium in 16-team leagues, just maybe especially tight ends, because I think there are maybe 18 to 20 reasonable starting quarterbacks, but make sure you're not the caboose on the quarterback run in a 16-team league.
Yeah, I especially tight end. I would be attacking that tier we talked about before with Ingram, Howard, Henry, Cook, those sort of guys. I think you could wait a little longer on receiver and attack running back, and quarterback, I'd still wait there. Not till the very end, but I would still be okay waiting a while.
All right, there we go. Agreed. Every day, remember, ask these questions on the Twitter live stream, YouTube live stream. Go to the ESPN app, send Kyle mail, whatever. Do whatever you want. Find a way to reach out to us. Before we get out, reminder, tonight, 6 p.m., Fantasy Football Marathon, ESPN, on for 28 straight hours. But tomorrow, Tuesday, August 13th, we are on at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on ESPN 2. It's pretty much like as good as ESPN, just twice as good. ESPN 2. Get it? We'll be there. Mike will not be there, but I said Matthew will be back. Mike will be on the Daily Wager and all over your airwaves during the Fantasy Football Marathon.
Daily Wager today.
Stephania will be on OTL and Daily Wager and the Fantasy Football Marathon. She's got her own podcast coming out. It's called The Life of the Bells. The Bell of the Ball, whatever. Daniel will probably be on it too. Daniel's getting a tattoo on live TV this year. Is that true? Or am I making that up?
already did it last year. We'll see if I do it again this year.
You're not opposed to doing it again
this year. In the meantime, as a reminder, a few tickets left. Maybe not by the time you guys are listening to this. But if you want to get lucky, go to TicketHub.com. Look for New York City live shows.
TicketWeb.com.
TicketWeb.com. I'm crappy at my job. Let's see if we're back tomorrow. I might be. Peace out.
Fantasy, you're in the 06010.